Weekend flares, sulfuric breezes, seasonal oil spills, glowing orange sodium bulbs. I grew up between my parents' homes in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and Houston, Texas, along I 10, so these condensers and storage tanks, like miniature cities, are familiar. Chemical plants provide jobs, they power our cars, they stock our grocery shelves. From the outside, it's easy to see the economic practicality. Society is rooted in the products of these industrial plants, but there is a trade-off. Superfund sites are heavily contaminated land recognized by the EPA. There are currently 119 active sites in Louisiana, and among these, there are 12 on the national priorities list, which qualify for long-term remedial investigation. Since the establishment of the program in the 80s, there's been over 600 Superfund sites throughout Louisiana. Devil's Swamp Oxbow Lake is on the national priorities list and rests less than 10 miles away from where I live, near LSU's campus. Even closer is Southern University, one of Louisiana's historically black colleges. Devil's Swamp is steeped in history. After the abolition of slavery, Alston and Scotlandville became the largest black community in Louisiana. Starting in the 1960s, the hazardous waste disposal facility, Rollins Environmental Services Incorporated, and Exxon Corporation, discarded chemical sludge into the swamp. In 1984, a class action lawsuit, McCassell v. Rollins, was filed to the Louisiana Supreme Court. This case helped spearhead the environmental justice movement and shone a light on the disproportionate injustices against low-income communities and communities of color. Only in 1993 were residents advised to not eat more than 2 meals of fish from the lake per month. And in 2015, the EPA finally published a formal warning to residents. The public has been advised not to fish, swim, or boat in the lake, as it is contaminated with PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls, among other pollutants. Some contaminants from Rollins waste disposal remain. PCBs are one of the largest concerns. They're what is called a persistent organic pollutant. They were identified as dangerous industrial chemicals as early as the 1970s in the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. Their use has been restricted, and the goal is to ultimately eliminate their production. The treaty gathered 169 countries and became international law in 2004. These compounds have 4 things in common. They are highly toxic, causing cancer among other ailments. They are persistent, lasting for years or even decades before degrading into less dangerous forms. They migrate. They're able to evaporate and travel long distances through the air and water. And they accumulate in fatty tissue, meaning they stay in the body. These synthetic chemicals are relatively new. They were produced in the 1920s, and their use ramped up in the 40s and 50s. They were used in a variety of processes in agriculture and industry, and they are found in the tissue of every human being on Earth. Some people have traces, and other people have more than traces. It all depends on exposure. PCBs specifically are known to cause developmental and reproductive issues due to their estrogen toxicity. Air pollution in its gaseous phase is naturally more temporal. The wind blows and concentrations move and fluctuate. 2 concerning facts about this type of pollution. Number 1, Louisiana and many other states do not consider cumulative impacts. Each plant is permitted to off-gas or release chemicals into the air, essentially a pollution permit. As long as the release is below a reportable quantity, the operation is within their perfect legal right. But what if there are 2 plants, or 3, or 10? Secondly, there is no 24-hour air monitoring in Louisiana. We don't know how this pollution might fluctuate, and it is hard to demand justice without quantifiable data. We are all participating in a global chemistry experiment and are exposed to a variety of chemicals throughout our lifetime. The average person eats more than a large trash can's worth of plastic. Proximity matters with air pollution, and these off-gassing industries are a neighbor to schools, hospitals, places of worship, and homes. Towns like Alston and Scotlandville are known as fence-line communities. They share a backyard with industry. Demographics can help us better understand groups of people and analyze race, income, and even health. Some people might think, well, why not just leave? If we know it's dangerous, shouldn't the people living here just move somewhere else? Income inequality says otherwise. Poverty rates show people in Ulsan have less flexibility to move away. The median income for the area was seen to be less than the poverty rate for a family of 4. When the area is a historically Black community established prior to heavy industrialization, we are begged to ask, who should really leave? The EPA's environmental justice screening tool can help us visualize how East Baton Rouge Parish compares to the nation. Many of these industrial sites are required to keep a risk management plan because of the hazardous nature of their processing. We can see the concentration of these facilities lines the Mississippi River. Devil Swamp is also among other areas that take on large levels of wastewater. Most of the parish is in the 90th percentile for air pollution in all of the nation. People living here are at higher risk for non-cancerous respiratory impacts, meaning the longer someone lives here, the more likely they are to suffer from asthma, emphysema, and even early death. The same can be seen for risks of developing cancer. So what can be done? My initial inspiration was post-industrial landscapes. It would be beautiful to clean up this land and return it to a community park. However, to do this would completely disregard the active pollution happening here every day. Instead, a phytoremediation manual and field study will be proposed. These methods use plants and microbes to better manage pollutants. In 2015, there were over 600 academic publications on phytoremediation, but only about 40 of these publications included references to field trials. These trials take on more variables than a sterile lab bench, so it would be a high priority to obtain more data this way. Although this is a relatively new development, so far it's quite promising. The method is cost-effective and can even be aesthetically pleasing. Phytotechnologies interact with chemicals in a variety of ways, some of which include phytostabilization, which reduces the mobility of metals in soil, phytodegradation, which alters the pollutants through enzymes or metabolic activity, rhizofiltration, which filters water, and phytoextraction, which removes pollutants from the soil and stores them in the plant to be harvested and disposed of. Good Design's character cards will be a source of inspiration to create a plant palette of both indoor and outdoor plants. This planting palette could be used at a variety of scales. The larger scale would consider buffering industrial sites with plants that best manage air pollution, particulate matter, and wastewater. The smaller scale would consider residential spaces and explore how members of fence-line communities can protect themselves.